But today I want to continue on with our thoughts from Hebrews, and culminating in Hebrews chapter 11. A lot of people are familiar with Hebrews 11. It is commonly known as the faith chapter. Now, faith is one of those things that gets misrepresented too often. People will talk about their faith when they're actually talking about their religious affiliation, their denomination, something like that. Or they'll be talking about having faith, but having faith in something that is pretty insecure. But Paul is talking about a different kind of faith. If we go back to Ephesians, we're told to put on the full armour of God, and tucked away in that is putting on the shield of faith, something to defend us against the fiery darts of the enemy. And so he starts in Hebrews chapter 11. He says, "Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see." Or the King James Bible says, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." And so faith is knowing with an absolute certainty, not just a nefarious hope I'll win the lotto or something like that, but knowing for absolutely certain that what we put our trust in is really going to happen. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients, the people who thousands of years before Paul was writing this, those people were commended for their incredible faith. And he does a little sideline just for a moment. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. It almost sounds like what the scientific world talks about when they talk about the Big Bang. They say that there was absolutely nothing, and then the nothing exploded into something for no apparent reason. Well, there is an apparent reason: God. And through him, he made everything out of what we can't see. Everything that we see in the natural world was made by him, by his spoken word. But then the writer goes on and talks about the faith of the different patriarchs. He talks about Abel, the second-born son of Adam and Eve, giving a better sacrifice by faith. Abel brought along a sacrifice of a lamb, knowing that the work of his hand was never ever going to be enough. Cain brought along a sacrifice of stuff that he had grown, but Abel brought along a lamb, and it was seen as a better sacrifice. He did that by faith. And then he goes on and talks about Enoch, and Enoch had such great faith. He walked with God, and at the end of the time, God took him. He didn't die. His body just simply disappeared. They couldn't find him. And it talks about Enoch and says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. And anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. And he goes on and talks about Noah, and how Noah was warned of a flood, something they had never ever seen before. And yet he prepared for it by faith. Talks about Abraham. Abraham, who was living in a city in the land of Ur, and God called him out. And during the time that Abraham was going to the promised land, he, his son, his grandson, none of them ever lived in anything other than tents. But he had in sight a city, something far, far bigger than he could ever imagine. But by faith he was seeing out into the distance, and possibly seeing beyond what we see now. It says that by faith he was looking forward to a city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And the area that he was walking in, possibly the area where Jerusalem is now, but he looked beyond that. And he was looking for a new Jerusalem, something bigger and better. By faith, Abraham, an old man, and his wife, double the age of possibility of ever having a child, and never had a child. And God promised to them that they were going to have children more than the stars in the sky. And hang on, that can't happen. But by faith he knew that it would happen. And by faith Sarah was able to conceive and brought forth Isaac, and from there Jacob, and from there the children of Israel, and the story continues. We read about Moses. By faith, his parents and the midwives who delivered, the midwives were under instructions from Pharaoh that they had to take any boy child and murder them. But by faith they said, not this one. This one's earmarked. God's had his hand on this. And by faith they were willing to risk their own lives to take that baby and hide it. And sometimes I think God's got an amazing sense of humour, because here was this baby who was condemned to die by Pharaoh, but was found in the river by Pharaoh's daughter. And Pharaoh's daughter adopted him, and he grew up in the court of Pharaoh as Pharaoh's grandson. Pharaoh commanded him to death, but no, he lived as Pharaoh's grandson. And then by faith, Moses saw that his kinspeople were living in bondage, in slavery, but God had better for them. He had a promised land. And by faith, he led them out of that promised land. By faith, they marched through the Red Sea as if it was on dry ground. By faith, he commanded the waters, and they rolled back over the Egyptian army, and they never saw them again. By faith, they went through the wilderness and came to the promised land. All of this because people were seeing God's plan and purpose in spite of the circumstances that they were living in right now. Faith takes us beyond our present circumstances, and we can put our trust in God. And I love, towards the end of that chapter, it comes across and says, but what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon or Barak or Samson or Jephthah, David, Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions and quenched the fury of the flames and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. Others were tortured and refused to be released so that they might gain a better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, while still others were chained and put in prison. They were stoned, and they were sawed in two. They were put to death by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and in holes in the ground. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what God had promised. God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. I don't know if you noticed, but in verse 35 that I was just reading, it talks about women receiving their dead back to life, and then keeps right on going and says, others were tortured and refused. They refused to be released so that they might go in a better resurrection. And sometimes faith is faith that brings a healing, brings a miracle, brings new life. Sometimes faith says, I'm going to hang on to God in spite of the circumstances. I don't care what the devil may throw at me. I don't care what the world throws at me. I'm going to hang on to God. That is faith, just as much as being raised from the dead. But when the writer to the Hebrews finishes that chapter, the description of all these giants of faith, he then goes on and says, therefore, Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Yes, we are. We've been preceded by giants of faith, and with their example, we can also reach out with faith to a God who loves us and cares for us so much. God bless you.